Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
5 more killed during violent clashes in Tunisia. Lebanon to launch talks on new government formation Monday. And U.S. Vice President Biden visits Iraq for talks on the exit of U.S. troops. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
اعتبر رئيس الجمهورية اللبنانية أن الحكومة التي يرأسها سعد الحريري.
The president of the Lebanese Republic accepted the resignation of the government headed by Saad al-Hariri. He asked the government to carry out its duties in a caretaker capacity until a new one is formed. The Lebanese parliament speaker said consultations on the formation of the new government will start on Monday. Our correspondent, Bursha Abdel Samad, analyzes the Lebanese crisis.
The crisis that hits a new impasse as soon as it seems to be moving towards a solution is back to square one. Once again, Lebanon is without a government. This time, it is due to the International Tribunal and the indictment in the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri. This indictment is expected to be released soon, and everyone fears it will trigger an explosion. Is it a coup, a settlement, or a bitter pill that needs to be swallowed? Many descriptions and interpretations abound, but the outcome is the same. The crisis is deepening and division increasing. One side is challenging the International Tribunal, which it describes as politicized, and demanding its termination, while the other is holding on to the tribunal until its last breath, armed with international and particularly American support. Loyalist forces, clearly surprised by the step taken by the opposition, believed the issue was still up for debate until the ministers resigned. It saw the act as a coup against the existing political system, challenging everything from the Taif Agreement to the Doha Agreement.
استقالة الوزراء خطوة غير محسوبة.
The minister's resignation wasn't clearly thought out, unless their goal is to keep the country without a government. Maybe the country will be without a government for months, or maybe more than a year. And then we will say that the problem is not assigning the head of the government or forming a government, but is rather a problem with the political system. We will then say, let's try to look into a new political system for the country.
ولكنها مشكلة نظام سياسي. تعالوا نبحث في نظام سياسي جديد للبلد.
As for the opposition, it chose to confront the other side with constitutional procedures. It wanted to push for a solution through the resignation of its ministers, after Saudi-Syrian efforts failed to provide one. The opposition says this is the first step in a plan it is keeping secret.
هلا بدها تروح باتجاه من اثنين، إما استشارات للتكليف وتشكيل حكومي.
There are 2 paths the opposition could take. It will hold discussions to form a government that will confront the International Tribunal by cutting off its funding, canceling its cooperation protocol with the Lebanese government, and withdrawing Lebanese judges from the International Tribunal in order to cripple it. Finally, it will transfer authority of the case to the Lebanese judiciary through the prosecution of false witnesses. If consultations do not work, the opposition might attempt that same approach in Parliament.
The Lebanese were promised a solution to the issue, only to be suddenly faced with an open-ended crisis. Lebanon is now back to square one. This phase holds numerous possibilities, and confrontation is one of them. Bushra Abdel Samad, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Leaders around the world are reacting to the fall of Lebanon's government. Many are expressing concern that it will create a state of prolonged political instability. Our reporter Jordana Miller is here in the studio with us to give us the details. Good evening, Jordana.
Thanks, Yochanan. Hezbollah's swift toppling of the Lebanese government has sent shockwaves through the international community. Israeli leaders are not making any official remarks in what seems to be an attempt to downplay fears that the political upheaval will spill over into violence along Israel's northern border. The Foreign Ministry spokesman Yigal Palmor made a very general statement that Israel is closely following the situation, adding that it is strictly an internal Lebanese affair. But Israel is responding on the ground. The IDF has put its soldiers in the north on high alert, though so far no units have been reshuffled and no reserves have been called up. The fear is that Hezbollah may try to pull off a wag the dog move and launch an attack to divert the world's attention from the political chaos it orchestrated in Lebanon. Military sources say the next few days will be critical and potentially volatile. But the overall assessment given today by security experts is that Hezbollah will not provoke a major conflict with Israel. The price of an Israeli retaliation would be too high and complicate Hezbollah's attempts to stay in power and find a political way out of the UN Hariri probe. Now, the United States has strongly condemned Hezbollah for bringing down the Lebanese government. The timing of the announcement has not been lost on the White House. Prime Minister Saeed Hariri was meeting with President Obama in the Oval Office when Hezbollah announced its exit in an attempt to humiliate and embarrass both leaders. Let's take a listen to what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said from Qatar.
View what happened today as a transparent effort by those forces inside Lebanon, as well as interests outside of Lebanon, to subvert justice and undermine Lebanon's stability.
Reactions in the Arab world have been filled with anxiety and dire scenarios. The head of the Arab League, Amir Moussa, warned that Lebanon could spiral into another civil war and trigger regional violence. He called for another unity government to be formed immediately. In Turkey, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister met with Turkish President Abdullah Gül to talk about the political crisis. Saudi Arabia had tried to avert Hezbollah's withdrawal from the government in talks with Syria that aimed to find a political solution to the upcoming UN report on Rafiq Hariri's 2005 assassination. The Saudis failed to cut a deal, and now it looks like they will play a role in helping to form the next Lebanese government. Laura?
Thanks, Jordana.
بكم. قال مراسل وكالة الأنباء من العاصمة التونسية إن دوي طلقات نارية سمع من مركز المدينة.
A reporter in the Tunisian capital said gunfire was heard in the city centre. For the first time since confrontations broke out about a month ago, Tunisian police have banned people from the area where they clash with protesters. Confrontations are mainly taking place in the commercial centre of the capital, several hundred metres away from the central bank building. The Associated Press said protesters threw rocks at government buildings and police fired tear gas at the protesters. This comes after 4 Tunisian protesters were killed in fresh clashes last night in Tadam district near the capital, despite the curfew imposed by police.
ليلة أمس في حي التضامن بالقرب من العاصمة، وذلك على الرغم من حظر التجوال المفروض.
The streets of Kasserine are the holy grail for cultural tourism in Tunisia. This is what they looked like last night when police imposed a curfew after another day of demonstrations, where protesters attacked government buildings and set fire to state-owned cars. What began as social demands turned into clear political slogans demanding the resignation of President Ben Ali. Tunisian state television held what it referred to as, quote, gangs of terror and vandalism responsible for the riots. Demonstrations expanded in the cities of Sifoukas, Bizerte, Douz, and Tala, the capital Tunis, and other cities. Police forces responded with tear gas and sometimes live bullets. This led to more fatalities, including a university professor and a man whose family said was deaf and did not hear the police warnings. These incidents at first astonished the international community and then prompted continuous reactions.
I'm aware that Tunisia does not have a very good record in dealing with protests. Earlier, the Human Rights Commission urged Tunisian authorities to resolve this issue and investigate cases of maltreatment and oppression. I am concerned about the protesters who are subject to arrest and torture.
Being held in detention.
The protesters' demands have evolved from a call for jobs to a condemnation of the rampant corruption in the administration and a demand that the perpetrators be put on trial. The authorities repeated their accusations that unnamed foreign powers are behind the unrest. They said foreign powers invested politically in a small group of extremists to undermine Tunisia. Overseas, Tunisian immigrants, human rights advocates, and Moroccan communities continue their demonstrations in solidarity with the protesters in Tunisia.
I'm glad because Ben Ali's time as president is coming to an end. This is as clear as the sunlight.
As a Tunisian, and on behalf of all Tunisians, I demand the resignation of Ben Ali and his government. I call for free elections so Tunisians can finally take back their freedom.
The carrot and stick policy did not successfully contain the anger of Tunisian youth. The government still has not delivered on its promises to provide monetary subsidies for college graduates, provide jobs, and release the arrested protesters, nor has it dismissed the interior minister and other officials. So what will happen next? People are predicting the protests will either escalate and extend to the neighboring Arab countries, or the authorities will successfully crack down on the unrest, but at a high political cost. Al-Siddiq Abu Hassan, BBC.
Security forces loyal to incumbent Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo said they have surrounded the scene of deadly clashes in the capital Abidjan. Clashes erupted between pro-Gbagbo forces and supporters of rival presidential candidate Alassane Ouattara. Security forces also prevented UN forces from entering the area.
The military in Ivory Coast accused the UN peacekeeping mission of fueling tension in the country. They said the UN mission has lost track of its main duty to restore peace and is now taking sides. This concern was echoed in a meeting between outgoing President Laurent Gbagbo and the Ivorian Army Chief of Staff.
It was provocative and shameful on their part. They are supposed to be an impartial force to bring us peace, but they have become something else.
In a move to restore security and reduce violence, army units were heavily deployed in the Abobo region, where fierce clashes between the two sides took place earlier. Several people were killed or wounded in the violence.
Troops are being deployed in order to pursue the rebels and remove weapons from the streets so people can return to their daily lives. We will continue to impose curfews in troubled areas so that we can do our job without scaring civilians.
The UN condemned the violence and announced that one of its patrol units was ambushed in the suburb of Abobo. Also in Abobo, fierce clashes erupted between pro-Gbagbo forces and Ouattara supporters. Acts of violence continue to erupt in Ivory Coast. Meanwhile, Gbagbo is ruling out the possibility of civil war erupting in Ivory Coast, adding that the country will not become a bloodbath.
In an unannounced trip, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden arrived in Baghdad, where he held talks with top Iraqi officials. The talks focused on the formation of a joint committee after the withdrawal of the U.S. troops there.
U.S. Vice President Joe Biden arrived in Baghdad on an unannounced visit early Thursday to hold talks with Iraqi officials. Biden met with Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, President Talabani, and Parliament Speaker Osama al-Nujayfi. High on the agenda of the talks were the withdrawal of American troops and the two countries' future relationship. Biden's trip was the first by a high-level U.S. official to the country since the new government was formed in December after a record-breaking delay. At a press conference, government spokesman Ali Al-Dabbagh said during Mr. Biden's meetings with Iraqi leaders, the issue of setting up a joint committee to follow up the withdrawal of the U.S. troops was debated.
Prime Minister Maliki and the U.S. Vice President negotiated the formation of a joint committee to follow the withdrawal of U.S. troops.
Mr. Maliki has on many occasions announced that he wants all the troops to leave on time, and the Obama administration also says it is planning to pull them out on schedule. The U.S. has some 47,000 troops in Iraq who are expected to leave by the end of the year under a security agreement negotiated between the then President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Maliki in 2008. However, there are fears that if Washington pushes for an extended troop presence, rifts could appear in Iraq's new government, setting the scene for another political crisis.
when they were on their maximum power, on the maximum of their military and embassy presence, they couldn't accomplish their agenda. And today they are much weaker. And I also have to say that President Obama is against the intervention in the Iraqi affairs.
And some view such visits as an attempt by the U.S. to exert pressure on the Iraqi government so that it adopts and follows policies that are favorable to the U.S., a charge that both governments have denied.
Americans have lost their grip on Iraq. Therefore, they are making such visits to force Iraqi officials to obey their instructions.
Meanwhile, 3 separate explosions rocked Baghdad during Biden's visit, leaving at least 2 people dead and around a dozen wounded. Shiite leader Muqtada al-Sadr, whose decision to back Maliki's bid for a second term in office broke the political deadlock in the country, has threatened to pull out of the government if the Pentagon decides to retain its troops beyond the scheduled deadline.
The Iraqi lawmakers interpreted Biden's visit to Iraq as a clear intervention in the Iraqi internal affairs and stated that Iraq is not committed to Biden's suggestions toward the formation of the Iraqi government. Moreover, they stressed on the importance of the withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Iraq as scheduled. Wissam al-Biati, Press TV, Baghdad.
في الناقورة انعقد في مقر تابع للقوات الدولية عند الحدود الدولية الاجتماع العسكري الثلاثي الذي ضم
Representatives from the Lebanese and Israeli armies convened a tripartite meeting with UNIFIL Commander General Alberto Acerta at the headquarters of the international forces in the border city of Naqoura. Relevant sources said the participants discussed a number of issues pertaining to the implementation of Resolution 1701. The sources also mentioned that they discussed Lebanon's rejection of Israel's request to drill in Lebanese economic zones, and Lebanon's demand that Israel halt these drilling operations and wait for the delineation of maritime borders.
Meanwhile, the Lebanese army leadership said that in a blatant assault on the residents of the border region, a patrol by enemy Israeli forces crossed over the high-tech wall south of Tarmaish and kidnapped a Lebanese citizen, dragging him into the occupied territory. On the ground, Lebanese military units deployed in the region took the appropriate measures to deal with the situation, while military leaders are holding intensive discussions with the UN interim force in Lebanon over the immediate release of the abducted Lebanese citizen.
In Palestine, bulldozers continue to build more settlement units and reinforce the Israeli presence in the occupied territory. As for the Palestinians' country of asylum, their roofs are falling on them. Palestinian refugees in Lebanon live between these two realities, without a land or without a roof.
Muhammad sleeps in this bed. Buckets are placed on one side of the bed to collect water dripping from the ceiling, and an oxygen cylinder is hung on the other side. She frequently relies on the oxygen because of a respiratory illness.
Water is leaking onto the bed. We can't sleep in there. My son and I sleep on the couch. My other son sleeps at his uncle's house. So we are a broken and displaced family.
Muhammad is not the only one. She's just one example, like Nizar, Naji, and Ahmed. UNRWA reports indicate that hundreds of refugees live in dilapidated buildings.
An UNRWA engineer came after the roof fell. We told them about the situation. He informed the main official responsible for renovations, Yahya Akawi, that the house is in danger of collapsing. We were told to remove the furniture in the living room because the roof might collapse. There are 3 families living in the house.
My children and I were sitting on the floor eating when something fell on my son's head. When we were sleeping in the bedroom, I felt like it was about to collapse. The backside of the closet is damaged, too. I'm worried about my children's safety, so I stay up at night in case something bad happens to them. My life is full of fear.
I have 3 children. I'm worried the roof is going to collapse on us. We pleaded for help, but nobody seems to care.
Since need is the mother of invention, and so is the fear of death, Ahmed Aisha set up a tent over his bed because the ceiling could collapse at any moment. They are enduring all of this, and no rescue plan is underway.
We demand UNRWA not politicize this issue, and we hold UNRWA, the factions, and every political party fully responsible. They should work to solve this
problem.
More than 850 houses are under threat of collapse, which makes walking from one room to the next within the same house feel like an adventure or attempted suicide.
سجلت في القسم الثاني مع دكتور خالد المبارك المستشار الإعلامي لسفارة السودان.
Tonight we discuss the situation in Sudan with Dr. Khalid al-Mubarak, media counselor at the Sudanese embassy in London. The peace agreement signed by the government stipulated that a referendum to decide Sudan's fate is to be held in 2011.
في عام 2011.
طيب بالنسبة لموقف الحكومة يعني نتذكر إنه خليني أذكر لك حادثة سريعا يعني أنا في.
Let me start off with an anecdote. In December, I was invited to a media event at the German embassy in London. It turned out that the building used to be the embassy of the German Democratic Republic.
كان سفارة جمهورية ألمانيا الديمقراطية وتوحدت ألمانيا طبعا وصار هو جزء.
Germany was eventually united, of course, and the building is now part of the United German Embassy.
الرئيس البشير في جوبا قبل يومين إنه حتى إذا حدث انفصال.
So, as President al-Bashir said in Juba, even if the South secedes, joint Sudanese relations will be maintained.
بمعنى إنه الحدود ستكون يعني سهلة وميسورة.
The border will be easy to cross and accessible. Communication will not be severed. We are hoping that regional unifications will eventually lead to a united Africa.
في خلال التوجه نحو وحدات إقليمية تؤدي في النهاية إلى وحدة إفريقيا كلها.
The Horn of Africa encompasses one regional unit, and the Nile Valley, Sudan, Egypt, and Southern Sudan encompasses another regional unit.
السودان ومصر وجنوب السودان كوحدة أخرى إقليمية. وإنه إذا كان العمل مشى.
If the people want these unifications, then they will eventually be formed.
الوحدات فإنها ستؤدي بمرور الزمن.
دكتور خالد تقول عندما تتحدث عن وادي تتحدث.
Dr. Khalid, you talked about the Nile Valley, about Egypt, Sudan, and Southern Sudan. However, this new state still lacks a name after it secedes. Do you have any idea what it will be called?
والله بعض الإخوة في الجنوب يعني مشغولون بالنشيد.
Some brothers in the south are preoccupied with the national anthem, flag, and name of the state. But just yesterday, there was a report by the Committee for National Unity that indicated issues are already present in the south.
الإنقاذ الدولية. لجنة الإنقاذ الدولية قالت إنه الآن في مشاكل.
There are tribal conflicts and food problems, and of course, the south is still under military, not civilian rule.
مشاكل غذائية في الجنوب.
It is ruled by the People's Army, and many of its soldiers are semi-illiterate. Yet they are carrying weapons and are patrolling towns and villages without any leadership. In addition, they are very undisciplined. The Americans and British tried to help the People's Army, but the soldiers are semi-illiterate.
South Sudan's independence vote cleared two major hurdles after former U.S. President Jimmy Carter gave the polls his endorsement. Organizers have also said a high turnout that passed the 60% minimum means the result would be binding. Carter said he also believed international creditors should forgive most, if not all, of Sudan's crippling debt to give both North and South access to fresh funds after the referendum. Sudan has previously called for its nearly $38 billion debt to be forgiven to strengthen prospects for peace. Carter said he had misunderstood comments made by Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir to mean the North was going to bear all the country's debt if the South secedes. He said he had spoken to Bashir and apologized about the comment he had made. The former U.S. president said the vote will meet international standards.
I think it will meet international standards on the conduct of the process and also the freedom with which people have cast their votes, and I believe the accuracy of the counting, although that's still to be determined.
China rejected Iran's proposal to Russia and China to tour its nuclear sites. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov cautioned such a visit could never replace regular inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency or talks with major powers. He was echoing the EU position on Iran's disputed nuclear program. However, a senior Iranian official said a tour of nuclear sites in the country would go ahead as planned. Iran's envoy to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Ali Asghar Sultaniyeh, said he had not yet seen any official response from China or Russia to the invitation. But he said other ambassadors would join the trip in Iran, including Egypt, Cuba, the Arab League, as well as Syria and Venezuela. Moving to sports, and in the Asian Cup, Jordan beat 3-time champion Saudi Arabia 1-0 in a Group B match in the Qatari capital, Doha. The match's only goal came in the 41st minute of the game from Baha Abdurrahman. The result left Jordan on 4 points from 2 games in Group B, while the Saudis have yet to get a point ahead of their final match of the opening stage against Japan. Right now, Japan is playing Syria in the other Group B match. Syria is leading with 3 points after beating Saudi Arabia, while Japan has 1 point after drawing with Jordan.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.